So let's dive right into kind of defining it. I'd like to get through this fairly quickly and leave some time for good question and answer session. This seems to be a fairly hot topic, so hopefully we've got some good challenging questions. So let's start with kind of defining it, just for those of you that are new to this or have heard this buzzword and not sure necessarily what it means. DDoS is a distributed denial of service. It's an attack that's based on your internet connection that comes from multiple locations, making it very difficult to defend against. The effects of it are basically an interruption to your internet-facing assets, things like websites, as well as to VPN connections and other core assets on your network. For those that want the non-technical definition, really think of it as having a normal conversation. You're kind of only really set up to process so many inputs at one time. So is your internet connection, and when you have a DDoS, basically it is a flood of information to the point with which your internet connection can't handle all of the incoming information, and really shuts everything down. So a normal traffic flow, you have clients that connect in over their internet connections. They go to where you connect to the internet, and they send information to you and you back to them. In a DDoS scenario, a hacker has gone out on the internet, or an attacker, and they have basically infected some machines that they now control. They get an aggregate of those machines and produce a volume of traffic or a type of traffic that will basically render your connection to the internet useless, stopping all of the good traffic that you want to get through. Additionally, they may use this as a mask to try and take access of a vulnerability or an issue that you have with your network to perpetrate some sort of fraud or defacement. So what are their goals basically? How does this affect you? They're looking to deface or to change your website or to somehow hinder your brand or your name. A business interruption, which has a similar type effect. And obviously, worst case scenario, trying to put together some sort of fraud. We've heard cases of basically these DDoS attacks, again, being a mask for them to try and go and force some other type of fraud through a weakness in your network. The business interruption is an important thing to think about, because basically with today's reliance on your internet connection, there are a lot more components of your credit union that rely on that. So an interruption to your internet connection could mean an interruption to third-party VPNs, which could affect your shared branching, your ATMs, your credit card authorization process, access to the Fed line, online mobile banking connections or other connections to your core, your websites that you run internally, your corporate site, your online banking site, but additionally access to other outside websites like your payroll or HR access. A lot of people today, to save telecom costs, are using SIP services. Those can be delivered over internet circuits. They may also then drive the call capacity to your IVR. So an interruption of this type may have a much broader effect on your network. And then finally, the reliance on email has become critical for many businesses today. And obviously, an attack or an interruption to your connection can have an effect on your ability to send and receive email. So what are people doing to defend themselves against this potential threat? There really are kind of four major approaches that we have seen. The first being a downstream mitigation. Downstream mitigation are services that your internet service provider can deliver through the large pipes that they have in their peering environment. So when an attack occurs, your internet service provider can stand in and potentially deflect that attack. It doesn't necessarily stop the hacker from trying to take advantage of a vulnerability in your environment, but it certainly does prevent that downtime or that business interruption. What are the challenges of that? It can be expensive. Most of these solutions are designed by service providers like AT&T or Verizon to be delivered to their large enterprise customers, and so they've priced at that level. Depending on who your provider is, they may not be able to mitigate SSL or DNS attacks. So obviously the websites are the types of attacks that we probably hear about most frequently. But there are also other types of attacks that can interrupt your business. DNS is a very popular one as well too. And some of the providers have really only put in place a process to mitigate attacks towards your HTTP or your corporate sites. If you have a backup provider or other providers or multiple sites, you may have to subscribe to multiple services, obviously driving the cost up to the more that you have to protect. You also may not have forensics or details for reporting. For what the NCUA has put out, it's important to really have your incident response together, and part of that is to be able to produce logs of key network components during the event so that you have that data to report and available for audits or questions about the event. Another way is attrition. Obviously, for some of the smaller CUs or people who really leverage third-party providers, if your email is off-site, if your website is off-site, if your online banking is off-site, if your core is off-site. So if a lot of your corporate assets are through service provider connections, you really can kind of just cut off your connection, and through attrition, the attack will obviously begin to fade away. The other approach that we're seeing a lot of is the on-site appliance approach, and I do want to dive into this, and hopefully this can be something we can talk a lot more about, because I think that there's some misconception in what people are able to do with the on-site appliance. There are a lot of people that have IPS or IDS, intrusion prevention or intrusion detection components in their security appliances on site. These are great and necessary things to have in your environment. However, they're not necessarily always designed to provide protection against these types of attacks that we're seeing today. So an intrusion protection or intrusion prevention device can really take a known attack signature and defend you against that individual attack. What you really want to look for from an on-site appliance is you want to look for that ability to have hardware that's specifically designed for the high volume type attack traffic. You want to have hardware that will profile your inbound connections and build limits and profiles on what normal traffic looks like, and then have a level of intelligence to identify when that pattern shifts away and start to provide either alerting or protection and mitigation there. So the sooner that you can identify that there's an issue, the better position you're going to be able to mitigate the potential downtime that could come from it. However,
I interrupt you for a second. Yeah. We've had a couple of people say that they were having a little trouble hearing you. Your volume was kind of going in and out, so I don't know if you were on a speakerphone. Maybe you can bring the handset a little closer.
All right, I can, give me 1 second, and I will try and switch to, I'm on a headset. I will try and go to the speaker and see if it sounds any better. Sharon, is this any better for you?
I think so. Why don't you keep going, and let's see if that does the trick.
Sure. Okay. So the issue with an on-site appliance, or one of the things that you need to remember when you're doing an on-site appliance type solution, is that you also have a strategy around the volumetric attacks. So while the on-site appliance can do a massive amount, and the right on-site appliance can do a massive amount of mitigation and protection, there still are scenarios where someone may just open up a flood of multiple gigs of traffic into your environment, and at that point, it just becomes physically impossible to keep up with the traffic from an internet connection perspective. So having a strategy around whether it's leveraging a small component from your ISP and then having the on-site appliance as well. It is certainly a component that needs to be taken into consideration. You're incorporating another security component, so you will have to develop some expertise around how to maintain and manage that if you go that route. Again, as I said, IPS and IDS is not essentially a DDoS mitigation solution by itself. You need to make sure that you've got some sort of intelligence around different types of attacks outside of IPS, the standard IPS IDS things that get picked up. And then many hardware solutions also don't support the SSL mitigation. So a more popular attack type that's originating is that secure encrypted attack. It makes it more difficult to look at the data coming in and determine whether or not it's real legitimate data or attack data because it's encrypted. So to talk about the protection service, your normal traffic would flow to your headquarters. In the event of an attack, you would basically re-announce your internet presence through one of two ways: out of the scrubbing center or the secure partner. They would take on that load of attack traffic. They would scrub it, they would clean it, they would determine what is the legitimate traffic, and they would hand it back to you. These services by themselves are usually reactive type services. If you set up your DNS appropriately and you do your failover via DNS and you have all of your ducks in a row, they can be done very, very quickly and can have minimal effective downtime to your websites. If you're going to redirect your network, you do need a /24, and you need to be appropriately registered to move that block between different service providers. So that's a fairly technical component that needs to be determined before engaging these scrubbing providers. And then the DNS diversion, moving your DNS over to the provider. There's certain ways that you need to set up your DNS to accommodate that. You must be able to no route traffic with your ISP. One of the things that we've actually seen happen is someone deploy a provider like this. They change their DNS to point to the provider so the traffic flows in that direction. However, their address space is still being announced from their corporate site, and the attacker just was able to very easily determine that the target of the site had changed, so they were going to go avoid DNS and go back to the original site. So they were basically kind of doing an end around on the scrubbing provider. And the only way to really handle that is to be able to no route your traffic with your internet service provider, be able to put that filter in place. Most today will provide that service at a fairly reasonable rate. So what have we done in this landscape? We obviously are hosting a lot of production environment these days, as well as the backup services that we provide to our clients. So we went out and decided to take a look at how we could provide protection for our assets, and wanted to make sure that we were taking into consideration what services we could also deliver back to our partners, our clients. And we really wanted to develop a solution that would kind of take the aggregate of the connectivity that we have today with a lot of credit unions and provide a large protection umbrella to surround them. That is kind of the way that our disaster recovery strategies have always worked, and we really wanted to take that same approach with this solution. So luckily we were able to connect up with Radware, and we really scoured the landscape and took a lot of different approaches, and were really not necessarily going to go originally the route of an appliance-based solution, but Radware offered a unique relationship where they additionally have scrubbing centers that we can use. So should we exceed our capacity, our volume from our peering sites, we can also escalate up to them. The way that works for us right now is if we see an attack towards one of our clients, through the same way that those service provider models we discussed, those clients can direct the traffic to us. we use our security appliances to clean and scrub that traffic and deliver it back over a VPN, or a lot of our clients are connected in through the existing MPLS connections or direct private circuits. Should that attack volume exceed, we can go directly to the scrubbing center, and we have a connection directly with them to provide that clean traffic back as well. One of the exciting things that we're really doing, though, is we're working with clients to kind of expand their perimeter security with an appliance as well. So this is, to me, this is really the best approach. We're seeing here with DDoS is just one way that we really need to start. One reason, excuse me, that we really need to start paying closer attention to our perimeter security. And while firewalls and other security devices provided us great protection at the perimeter, what we're really seeing is that with the increase in connectivity and the complexity of applications, we need more than just rules to hide things. We need rules to and appliances to inspect traffic and make sure that A, that there's no vulnerabilities, that B, if there are, we're protecting our perimeter and keeping them from being exposed. And third, with special hardware to really accommodate the high internet speeds that most of us are deploying today. The great thing about this solution, really, that we've seen is additionally the peering with the appliance. We're able to see the profile data that's created around defending our client's environment in our appliance. So when that escalation needs to occur, when that volumetric attack happens, we already see the regular traffic patterns that have been communicated up from our client's appliances into our environment and ultimately up into the scrubbing center. So it really provides a faster mitigation process. There's no discovery or profiling of the traffic that needs to be done. We're taking the same attack vectors and approach that was established when the attack began on the client's environment, client site. So what that looks like basically is we're going to see the attack initially there, and if the need to escalate occurs, we're able to do that fairly seamlessly with the DNS redirection or a BGP announcement to our environment and up to our partner scrubbing environment with Radware. So I wanted to talk a little bit just to make sure that we understood how that traffic is redirected, because ultimately, whether it's through one of the large providers that's out there, or whether it's through our service or other services, it is really important to understand what you need to do to be able to move your traffic. Obviously, there's only a limited amount of internet connectivity at your site, and to really mitigate against these large attacks, you need to be able to move that traffic. So the two ways basically are moving your traffic by creating a BGP announcement change, which is basically taking your internet space and announcing it out of a different location. Your IP addresses get migrated over to another site, and then there's a tunnel back to you that delivers that traffic back. You need to have a /24 to be able to do that, and you need to be registered appropriately with your internet service provider so that traffic, that block, can be announced by a different provider. DNS, which is probably the more popular way that we've seen, certainly with smaller networks. You can move just a single website being attacked. It's easier to move just that single website instead of your whole block. But again, as I talked about, you really need to be able to do that no routing with your internet service provider and provide that filtering further down to give yourself a broader protection. So as I mentioned, we're working with Radware to provide our protection services, and luckily enough, we actually had them on site today. So I would like to hand over to them to provide a couple of slides on what they're seeing in the landscape. They're working with some of the top internet companies out there, some really popular brands and names, and are seeing a lot of attacks, and it is certainly helpful to us to get exposure to that experience and some of the information. So I'm going to pass over to Royce and Scott.
Thanks, Hugh. Appreciate it.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
So again, as an introduction, my name is Scott Hoff. I'm the Mid-Atlantic Regional Sales Manager for Radware, and I have the pleasure of working with these folks to essentially stand up this product for you guys. So essentially what we are seeing out there today is essentially a very changing attack vector.
Sharon, there's some background noise. Can you mute everybody except Scott and I?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm still on, but I'll also
Sure.
mute.
Okay, are you still on the line?
Very good. We're still here.
Okay, great.
So just a little bit of background on who Radware is. We've been in business since 1995, public since 1999. Very large pedigree of customers, as you can see in the top left box. We are right now leading the enterprise space in deployments for DDoS mitigation, and we are quickly taking the majority of the marketplace for carrier-level deployment as well. We are stood up in front of most of the largest banks in the United States at this point, and we are protecting all the stock exchanges around the world. The company has grown exponentially over about the past 15 years. Doing very well financially. We are recognized in Gartner's Magic Quadrants. We are in the leadership quadrant for our application delivery controllers, or our load balancers. And that's important to note because those are the devices we use for SSL mitigation that Hugh was speaking to earlier. And we are also just below the leadership quadrant for our security devices. Right now, Gartner only has a quadrant for IPS. So they are lumping the advanced DDoS systems that we have into that quadrant right now, but we're quickly going to break into the leadership space of that next year. We have some global partnerships with most of the largest organizations out there, the likes of Microsoft, SAP, Juniper, IBM. A lot of them are OEMing our gear to put in their infrastructure to multi-purpose for either load balancing or security architectures. So really what we want to talk about today are the trends that we've been seeing over the past years. So when attacking over the internet became very popular in 2002 today, we've seen a huge shift in the landscape of these attack trends. They were very, very basic starting back in 2001. One of the most prevalent attacks was the Code Red and the NIMDA attack. Those were global events that were really propagated by worms, Trojans, bots. Bots became a little bit more popular in the mid-2000s, 2005. And really what we've seen is an escalation of these attack tactics. So we are seeing the traditional trend of attacks starting with a very volumetric approach. Traditionally, they are of a connection-oriented footprint. And what that means is the attackers are actually at a very high rate, not necessarily large bandwidth, but a very high rate, having sessions that are trying to establish connections into your infrastructure. That is just as bad, if not worse, than the massive volumetric attack that usurps a lot of your bandwidth, because the connection-oriented attacks can take down assets such as server farms, any infrastructure that holds a state inspection table or connection table, much like a firewall, an IPS device, a load balancer. So we are seeing these attacks change from, just your basic worm to SYN floods is traditionally how the attacks are going to start. And almost all of the attacks we are seeing these days, especially in the attacks that have been very, very popular in the news with the OpUSA threat, ending up being a layer 7 or application layer attack. A lot of the events are evolving into some sort of encrypted event using SSL to try and go after the individual assets in an encrypted throughput session that will totally usurp any of your other security devices as long as there's a session destination that passes the checksum in your firewalls or your IPS. The attack is not recognized until it's to your server assets, and at that point it's already too late. So this blended approach that the attackers are taking are what is causing all of the problems for these inferior devices or for organizations that try and stand up multiple security devices to accomplish really one common theme of DDoS prevention. So essentially what we were just talking about is this layered approach. So the attacks typically start out at layer 3 and layer 4. They're attacking your network layer. This is your IP addresses. They're going after your border routers, just essentially trying to brute force their way in the door. And then if that doesn't work, they come in via low and slow attacks. These are going to be your connection-oriented attacks. They are going to be trying to take down your physical assets, your servers, your server farms. And then ultimately they're going to try and migrate these attacks into a layer 7 based attack, whether it's directly for an asset, going after a database via something like a SQL injection, cross-site scripting, SSL brute force attacks. They are ultimately going to try and get to the assets that are rendering the business itself, either the online web farm or application, to be in a state of disarray. We are not seeing many attacks that end up with actual data theft. Most of the attacks that we're seeing, and this has been primarily the goal of OpUSA, are what we're terming hacktivists. The hacktivists either have some sort of political motivation, or they're just out trying to, do something to publicly embarrass another organization. Website defacement's been very, very popular as part of these, or simply a password theft and then posting those online just to sort of say, look what I did, I can do this. The company that you are trusting this sensitive information to is maybe somebody that you shouldn't be working with. That common goal of the hacktivist society is very prevalent, and it's very harmful. So in majority of these attacks, like I mentioned, are moving into the application layer. Starting with the SYN flood is a great way to sort of screen the attack, and then we're migrating their way into actually going for the assets downstream of the network. And we're all seeing these in parallel. I think that's the biggest takeaway from this. I like to talk to my customers, down in layman's terms, that when we were kids, we used to throw a snowball up in the air so everybody would look at the one that you just threw, and then you would hit them in the chest with the one you were hiding behind your back. That's what these attackers are doing also. The SYN flood or the volumetric,
that was just me. I'm sorry.
That is sort of distracting everybody. And they go under the radar with a low and slow attack after the application assets. We're actually finding that it's not the big, 40 gig or the more newsworthy 100+ gig attacks that are causing the most harm. It's the 30 meg attacks that are infiltrating the application layer or the application itself that are causing the most damage to the organizations. So what does that mean is that anti-DDoS is important from layer 3 all the way up through layer 7. And having that blended approach to security to protect that blended approach to the hacking efforts is very important in your choice of providers. This screen here is a great representation of all of the different technologies you would need to achieve what OGO has built in their security infrastructure. So the green dots on this slide are representative of the capabilities that each one of the hardware devices has at the top, and the red and orange dots are indicative of where they fall short. So you can see, literally, you would have to have 8 different hardware appliances to achieve what OGO is being able to drive through their integration with on-site hardware as well as their cloud scrubbing facilities. So one of the things that I think is very important is that any device you put on-site is not your only preventative measure that you should be considering. So your weakest link, regardless of how big those pipes are, is typically going to be your internet connection. That's why having a failover to ongoing operations protective services is so important in conjunction with that on-site device. The on-site device is going to lower your mean time to mitigate. It is going to allow OGO to baseline the legitimate traffic versus the attack traffic instantly and be able to immediately send clean traffic back to you in the event that you fail over to them. Your internet pipe and your firewall and your server assets are your top vulnerabilities that a DDoS attack will be able to achieve a compromising event in the in basically is the 0-day attack time frame, and having that blended approach is going to be very important. So one of the biggest things that we're seeing from our emergency response team is the duration of these attacks. And again, this is so important to have that on-site device as well as the integration with ongoing operations, because these attacks now are lasting for weeks, sometimes months, per event or multiples of events. We're seeing some of our larger customers that are hit. Literally, we have one customer that's been hit almost every single day for a solid year straight. And without having a on-site device as well as cloud-based integration is going to essentially hurt that business to react from the volumetric floods as well as the 0-minute events as the attacks changing their vectors and the attack profiles are changing almost on the fly. And again, it's important to note that while the volumetric attacks are the ones that make the news, it's the application attacks that are very, very small that sneak under the radar. They're the ones that are causing the most problems. We're still seeing, obviously, the volumetric attacks cause a lot of damage because your finite asset is typically your internet connection, but the ones that cause the most harm are the low and slow attacks that go right after the network assets. And protecting yourself from layer 3 to layer 7 is the only way to achieve your total protection from a DDoS perspective. We're seeing some pretty big attacks. DNS is one of the largest ways to take a carrier provider down. Our solutions certainly provide DNS protection. Hugh's talked about that several different times. And they're going to be protecting their own DNS assets from attack as well. So Hugh, I don't know how much more you want us to go into some of the top news, but I can certainly flip through some more of these slides. There's obviously the banking industry. That's one of the reasons we're on this phone, but they're very, very popular. 2 of the largest banks in the country right now are at the top, number 1 and number 2 for dissatisfied customers in the world, simply because of the unavailability of their online banking. And the DDoS attacks have been putting them in that situation. And ultimately, your money is going to be at risk at some point. We haven't seen it evolve to too much actual asset leakage, but the threat is certainly there. Thank you. I think that's about it for my side.
Yeah,
turn it back over to you.
Yep, this is a good time. I would hope for us to see if we can get any good questions and start any dialogue.
Yes, and we do have a few questions from the audience. The first one, are you seeing the attacks still focused on larger organizations or larger credit unions, or do you feel like institutions of all size are at equal point?
I would probably not say equal risk. I'll certainly let Scott weigh in on what they're seeing from the scale and size of the different companies that they have. But from our perspective, really, it is a risk across the board, obviously for everybody because of the potential impact. But the likelihood does diminish based off of the size. Although there are also certain segs, I think, that are more at risk due to the public nature of their sponsorship. So it's not necessarily an easy answer, but it certainly is and certainly the really huge volumetric attacks we've really only seen towards some of the larger organizations. The attack that we had to mitigate recently was 5 gigs, and it was not towards a fairly large organization. So to contradict myself, it's fairly hard to judge. Scott, do you want to provide any metrics as far as what you've seen from the size and frequency from your clients?
Yeah, I would say the size of the attack is not directly related to the size of the organization being attacked. Certainly the bigger companies become more vulnerable and visible targets for the hacktivists, but I have also seen a custom home builder be threatened by Anonymous and have a pretty massive volumetric attack launched against it, and you would never think that a home builder would be somebody that Anonymous would be even remotely interested in trying to attack. So it really goes across the board. The volume and size of the event has nothing to do with the revenues or scope of the organization. Ultimately, it comes down to when an event is planned against a suspect target, how many people can the group, be it Anonymous, be it Ababil, whomever, coordinate into their efforts as part of the event, and then depends on the type of tool they're going to unleash. It also depends on the network that's carrying the attack and how much traffic it can handle. So there's a lot of different, I guess, categories to define how big that event is going to be. But again, I think the biggest point that I was hoping to make earlier is it's not the volumetric attacks that really hurt you. We've actually seen a very, very large organization have their entire server farm taken down with a 30 meg volumetric connection-oriented attack that was sending about 50 million packets per second, each of them very, very small. It was a massive SYN flood, and it was able to take down their IPS device and their entire server farm with very, very low volumes of throughput. So it really depends. I think everybody, the net is everybody needs to be prepared. It's like life insurance. Too late's too late.
Thank you very much, Scott. And I know, I apologize, there was an echo, I believe, when I first asked that question. But the question, again, was whether larger organizations or larger credit unions were at larger risk, or if everyone was at risk. And I think Scott kind of summed it up there in the end nicely. The next question that we have, audience, is regarding to third-party providers such as online banking vendors. What type of information should credit unions be asking for from these third-party providers relative to DDoS, Hugh?
That is a very good question, and just as we're a third-party provider and a hosting provider and getting those same types of questions, I think it is really important to press them. I've seen a lot of, prior to the May 7th, I saw a lot of announcements come out from some of the credit union service providers, and a lot of the information was very inconclusive. So you really need to be comfortable with the strategy that they're deploying. You need to ask specifically what is the limit of the size of the attack that they can take on. That will certainly tell you as to whether or not they have gone as far as partnering with anybody who can do any sort of downstream or large volumetric protection. And in this scenario, I think brand names do have a place, and if they're partnering with a Prolexic or a VeriSign or and, you know, some of those providers, that's a good sign. If they've deployed, you know, I think the Radware, Arbor, rearray, some of those types of solutions, again, I think that shows that they've taken an approach to protect against DDoS and not just trying to recycle their perimeter security with their IDS through SecureWorks or through Cisco. So again, I'd look for brand names, and I'd look for and press them and ask them what size of an attack are they positioned to defend against.
Okay, great. Thank you, Hugh. The next question kind of goes back to the different mitigation strategies you were talking to before and the different sizes of credit unions. Are there certain mitigation strategies you think are more appropriate for smaller credit unions?
Yeah, I think that has a lot to do with what your setup is. So we've got some small credit union clients that are using some generic hosters, some of the GoDaddies or some of the other people out there like that for their corporate website. And in those scenarios, there are solutions like Cloudflare that are fairly inexpensive that they can use to provide protection and make sure that their site is up and can take on a volumetric, a large DDoS attack. So what the NCUA suggests and what we always did from a disaster recovery perspective, I think is really important, and that is to go through the activity of doing the impact analysis. Look at all of your public-facing internet resources, your online banking, your website, your if your connectivity to shared branching. Do an analysis of what the impact would be for an outage of those services, and I think that'll really shed some light on what you need to invest into the strategy of mitigation. And it certainly has that's the way we've always approached disaster recovery, performing that business impact analysis and that financial impact analysis, and then really developing a plan around where that kind of matches up on the right level of investment.
Thank you, Hugh. And it looks like we've covered all of the audience questions for now. Hugh or Scott, do you have any closing comments as we get ready to sign off?
Yeah, I'd like to just continue to reiterate that I think the right way to make an investment in protection in this area is to really step back and look at this as a perimeter security approach. You're probably spending money already on IPS and IDS or some of those other managed security, perimeter security solutions, and really go back and take a look at that and reanalyze that strategy and incorporate these types of DDoS attacks as well as the web application filtering and things like that. There are much better perimeter security solutions that you can deploy today that give you great protection of your application environment, your public-facing application environment. And as as mobile services and all these other services continue to expand and grow, and the expectation of your consumers, your members being able to access those things 24/7, it becomes more important, and that impact becomes greater when they're not available. So, don't just get necessarily sucked into just mitigating against the word DDoS. Step back and take a look and create a comprehensive, perimeter security approach.
Thank you, everyone, for attending today. As I mentioned, we will have a recorded version of the presentation and the